The PlayStation Vita is an unfortunate console. During the 8 years it was on store shelves, it managed to only sell slightly less than 16 million units. That's about 20% more than the Wii U, a console that many still regard as a financial flop. It'd be fairly easy for something that sold so poorly to fade to the edges of obscurity. Yet, the Vita's grown over time to have an increasingly positive image in the eyes of the larger game community, with some folks even suggesting that Sony should consider a follow-up handheld. But why? Why does something that had such a small audience now garner so much respect? Better yet, why did something so respected fail in the first place? Let's start to unpack that by jumping back a bit to 2011, the year the Vita launched. Sony had just spent the past 6 years with their first portable console, the PlayStation Portable. The PSP sold extremely well, had multiple revisions to keep it fresh, and was my own first handheld computer that doubled as a true multimedia device. Whether for games, movies, or music, the PSP was, and still is, a fantastic machine deserving of its own video. But in 2011, 6 years after the PSP launched, Sony faced problems on multiple fronts. The first problem was that while the PSP sold well, it sold only about half as many units as its main competition, the Nintendo DS, and would likely sell even less over time if Sony couldn't release a new version to compete with whatever Nintendo had coming next. All consoles ultimately had a limited lifespan of relevancy within the market, and the PSP was clearly nearing its end. The second, and potentially bigger, problem was the growing specter of mobile gaming. By 2011, the growth of Apple's App Store and popularity of various free-to-play titles and mobile ports had led to a ton of speculation by industry analysts about the death of consoles altogether. After all, why would all but the most dedicated gamers shell out hundreds of dollars for consoles when they could buy a mobile game on their smartphone for much, much cheaper? In 2023, that line of thinking seems pretty ridiculous for more powerful home consoles, but it still has some kernel of truth for handheld gaming overall. Nowadays, smartphones are pretty much the most popular gaming platform for most people playing video games. It's just that now we're at a state where dedicated handhelds have differentiated themselves enough to justify their niche, whether in sheer utility or as more powerful devices. That differentiation wasn't necessarily as clear back in 2011 and was enough to create some initial doubts about the Vita's viability. Sony seemed to realize the potential death of the handheld market on some level, and by the Vita's launch had already released the Xperia Play, a sort of hybrid between a Sony Ericsson phone and a stripped-down PSP. As a proper gaming smartphone, the Play in particular seemed poised to jump in if the wave of smartphone games capsized Sony's handheld console business. Unfortunately, the Play didn't really catch on for various reasons, and the Vita needed to stand alone against both Nintendo and the uncertain mobile market. It was honestly a particularly bad time to be launching a brand new handheld in such murky waters. On paper, the Vita should have been perfectly fine to stand on its own though. Sony marketed it as a true next-generation handheld, with smartphone-like wireless connectivity and graphics rivaling the PS3. In every way, shape, or form, the Vita Sony announced was the epitome of what folks would expect from a PSP 2, and clearly differentiated itself from what could be offered on mobile platforms at the time. Yet, it didn't do so great. Initial sales were pretty decent in the first month of its December 2011 Japan launch, with 1 million units sold by February, when it launched in other regions. After 1 year on store shelves, the console was selling around 50,000 units per month though, and continued to decline until Sony stopped reporting sales figures for the device in 2015. This is despite very positive reviews of the device at launch, a multitude of fantastic first-party games launched early on, and a design much more suited for serious gaming than the competition, despite the competition outselling it 10-1. The stellar design is Unfortunately, likely one of the reasons the Vita actually failed. The launch version of the Vita screams premium with its metal railing, fantastic OLED display, back touchpad, dual thumbsticks, and satisfyingly clicky buttons. Oh, and did I mention you could get it with 3G for true mobile gameplay? It's one of those consoles that's super impressive on paper and easy to like the moment you pick it up for the first time and start actually pressing buttons. Unfortunately, premium materials cost a premium price. At launch, folks could buy the Vita for $250 or $300 if they wanted 3G access. That's pretty expensive for a handheld console. For context, by the time the Vita launched in North America, the original 3DS sold new for under $200. And unlike the Vita, it actually had internal memory to download and play digital games right out the box. That's right, these original models have no writable memory on board for installing games, which meant that anyone buying the machine also needed one of Sony's proprietary memory cards to do basic things like download apps and save their games. If implemented correctly, that might not have been terrible, to be honest. Sony's known for creating proprietary formats that don't entirely suck. Think Betamax, Minidisc, or Blu-ray. Heck, the PSP used Sony's Memory Stick Pro Duo format for its memory cards. The difference this time is that those memory cards were used on a wide variety of Sony's other products, while the PS Vita memory cards were only compatible with the Vita. Sony's reasoning was security focused, with an aim to crack down on the piracy that had run rampant on the PSP. In practice though, it only meant more expensive memory. I bought my Vita used in 2013 for about $130, with the 16GB memory card adding another $35. And that price has stayed pretty high over time, especially now that the Vita's discontinued. If anyone wanted to mainly play games digitally on the Vita, that'd likely mean shelling out up to $100 for 32GB of memory. Increasing the starting price for the Vita up to $400 when it was brand new before buying any games if you didn't happen to buy one of the bundles that came with a 4 or 8GB card. That's a hard sell compared to Nintendo's handhelds or even most smartphones at the time, which had some semblance of onboard storage and used generic SD cards for expanded data. Sony realized this a bit by cutting prices on the console itself after sales didn't pick up after 2 years on the market. They also introduced a second version of the Vita, which used more plastics in its design and swapped the OLED display for an LCD to cut costs further. As much as I really like that slimmer model, it unfortunately did very little to actually lower the overall price of entry, beyond including a paltry 1GB of internal memory on the device itself. For those prices, folks really needed to want to play games on the Vita, and that leads us to the second problem the console faced: the games. While doing research for this video, I stumbled upon an opinion piece in PC Mag from 2022, in which the author screamed into the void, wondering why so many people continued to praise a console that had no games. Even if the article's a bit hyperbolic, I get why that sentiment exists. When I bought my Vita, I only did so to play Persona 4 Golden. Totally worth it, by the way. Afterward, I did have a ton of fun playing Gravity Rush, Muramasa Rebirth, and the Final Fantasy III remake, but I eventually reached a point where I wasn't hearing about any new Vita games, and it legitimately felt like there weren't any additional games to play on the platform. In fact, beyond a few great first-party releases, original games for the Vita that most people would actually want to play weren't extremely plentiful within the first year or two of release. That was made even worse by the lack of backwards compatibility with folks' physical PSP collections and lack of digital support for some PSP games launched physically. Sony made the situation even worse by shifting their vision for the system to mainly game streaming after the PS4 launched in 2013. After that point, the struggling system leaned heavily on third-party developers to keep it afloat, which didn't work out all that well to increase sales. It was a heavy pivot from the device Sony first announced 2 years earlier as a powerful handheld backed by the full weight of Sony's studios. Considering sales had already tanked by the time Sony abandoned the Vita, who knows if their continued support would have actually helped that much, but it definitely cemented the handheld's doom. With a high price, proprietary storage, and no backwards compatibility, drought of big games after its second year, and Sony's lack of major support after the PS4 launched, it's easy to get a sense for why the Vita didn't do so well. Why is it viewed so favorably now then? Well, nostalgia is probably at least a good source of many people's attitudes toward the Vita. 11 years is enough time for folks who grew up with the console to be more ingrained in gaming communities and start to talk more openly about their fondness overall. That might even be true for the many folks who have never even held a Vita in their hands. The Vita was the first handheld console to really push the idea of home console graphics on the go, something the Switch has since profited from greatly. It also pioneered remote play features in the most portable form factor at the time, which has since grown to a very large sector of Sony's overall software strategy for PlayStation. It's not difficult to imagine plenty of folks looking at such a premium, fully featured device in hindsight and seeing the missed opportunities. Plus, contrary to that PC Mag article, the Vita does actually have an abundance of games now. Anyone picking up the console these days can still find the mostly good first-party and big-name third-party games that launched during the first few years. Sony also released a slew of PS1 games to the Vita store while keeping all the previously available digital PSP games, so there's quite a bit of stuff to sift through within the marketplace that's still going strong. Plus, after Sony's support ended, the Vita entered a sort of renaissance for indie games. Popular titles like Binding of Isaac, Shovel Knight, and Fez all got ported to the system. Those games were successful in their own right on the platform and helped cement PlayStation as a platform for indie games in general. Even if not technically the best way to play those games these days, the console's also aged incredibly well. The buttons still feel fantastic, and the OLED display of the original Vita competes favorably with the modern heavy hitters like the Steam Deck and Switch Lite. If someone were to release a brand new handheld with the same exact design and maybe a different operating system, I'm betting it'd work out pretty great. And if you really wanted something new out of the Vita in 2023, there's always the modding scene. Honestly, you can't get into any discussion about the Vita's viability in 2023 without discussing the potential to modify it in some way with custom firmware. Anecdotally, it's the reason I see most people actually seeking out the Vita these days, because modding is incredibly quick and easy, and makes the Vita a bit of a Swiss Army knife. Through modding, you can play homebrew games, use the Vita's cartridge slot to expand storage, back up your existing game library, and emulate a ton of retro consoles like N64, GBA, PSP, PS1, etc. Though, if I'm being honest, I personally wouldn't call it the best way to play many retro consoles in 2023. There are a lot of better, newer options available on the market. But unlike any of those other options, the Vita packs some of the same hardware as a real PSP. That means emulation is typically more accurate than something like my Steam Deck, which uses software-based emulation alone. That makes it an interesting emulator for me, and no doubt is the cherry on top for a lot of folks still enjoying the Vita today. Taking a step back, it feels like the Vita didn't sell well due to Sony making some awkward decisions and maybe too ambitious of a design right out the gate, which naturally drove prices much higher than expected. But it's those same awkward decisions and overly ambitious design choices which cement the legacy of the Vita as something more impactful than a typical commercial flop. After all, it's the first modern handheld to attempt home console level graphics, its suite of connectivity tools, including 3G access, was very forward-thinking, while its compatibility with PS4 Remote Play was the first viable version of remote game streaming on the market, even Sony's weird decision to stop producing games for the console ended up providing a rich catalog of indie games that may not have otherwise found their way to the Vita. While researching this video, I kept coming back to the ways in which folks appreciate what the Vita was trying to do during its time. Those same folks are disappointed that Sony dropped the ball, but love how much they can do with their Vitas now. No matter how much of a revisionist take some people might see it, I think that the level of respect the PlayStation Vita has achieved makes it more of a success than its sales figures would lead you to believe. Those are my thoughts though. What are yours? Do you have personal thoughts or feelings about the Vita? Are there any games you think anyone new to the Vita should definitely try? Let me know down in the comments. And as always, if you found this video interesting or informative, go ahead and click that like button. In the near future, we'll have some additional videos walking folks through the Vita modding experience, as well as more thoughts on actually playing games on the system in 2023. Make sure you get subscribed so that you don't miss out. If you'd like to support the channel more, consider buying us a coffee over on Patreon or Ko-fi. I really need to stay caffeinated to read through all of the old reviews for these sorts of videos, and really appreciate the folks who have supported us in the past. That's going to be all for this video though. Until next time, catch you later.